Bulavanaka, and good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, fellow ministers from the Pacific region, development partners, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, my apologies for the delay this morning. A number of factors, plus I'm not feeling too well, so please excuse me for my speech, or if I sound a bit fluey. But it gives us much pleasure to welcome you all here this morning. As you know, climate change, of course, is a very critical development issue for us. It's also a survival issue for us in the Pacific. We actually know that the Pacific Island countries in particular have a very low carbon footprint, almost negligible in comparison to the other regions in the world, other countries in the world. But we are also at the very cold face of climate change. We have countries, of course, that are very vulnerable, even in a country like Fiji, which is seen to be very much above sea level. We've already removed about 3 or 4 villages to higher ground. We've got about 64 villages that are up for relocation in the next few years also. So the threat of climate change is very real. The reality, of course, is that climate change within its context vis-a-vis Paris Agreement, the Pacific Island countries have a much bigger focus on adaptation as opposed to mitigation, given the realities in Fiji, given the realities in the other smaller Pacific Island countries. So I think that's also something that needs to be highlighted constantly, that within the overall spectrum of global effort regarding climate change, more countries, or I should say some countries in different parts of the world, have a bigger focus on adaptation as opposed to mitigation. We also have various challenges, of course, in the Pacific. We have issues of economies of scale in terms of what one may call bankable projects. The reality of bankable projects is that in many Pacific Island countries, the population sizes are almost, we're the only Pacific Island country that's close to 1 million apart from Papua New Guinea. All the other Pacific Island countries are a few 100,000 people. Niue has a population, I understand, of about 15,000 people, if not less, depending on migration patterns. These are some of the issues, of course, that confront Pacific Island countries in the ability to also attract investment, be able to attract funding. The major issue that we have been highlighting in the past few years, and this is why this meeting is very, very important, has been the lack of capacity within the Pacific Island countries, civil service, the various agencies that exist within the Pacific Island countries, the capacity to be able to understand and also to access funds that are available. Many a times, we are told the general sort of discourse is that it's a bureaucratic maze to actually access funds, inability to be able to talk to the right people. And we had highlighted this earlier this year when we had meetings in Korea and various other gatherings. And I'm glad to say that as a result of that, we have now partnered with UNESCO. And in fact, at the back of this meeting here, this Friday we have, I think, representations from about 8 different Pacific Island countries where officials are coming along. And together with officials in Fiji, we are having a training workshop in respect of accessing funds and how to go about it and getting accreditation. Cook Islands, the Honourable Minister is here, of course is the only Pacific Island country ministry that I understand is already accredited, Finance Ministry. That in itself is of course a major feat, but he'll also tell you that it took them 4 years to get that accreditation. So these are some of the challenges that we need to be able to understand, we need to be able to know, and also of course I think the GCF also would probably like to hear from us. We had the last week before last, we had a very informal meeting in Nadi, where we had a number of Pacific Island countries that gathered together without the flags and sort of sat around and basically had what we would call in Fiji a talanoa session, which is just a conversation about some of the challenges. It was not only to do with climate change per se, but it was to essentially talk about various issues such as taxation, black economies and leakages within the economy, and development issues and how it can be addressed within the finance framework. And that was a very good session we had. Because I think when we do talk about climate change, we need to take a holistic approach. The reality is that with Pacific Island countries, fundamentally, you cannot separate climate change adaptation measures and say then there's a separate issue regarding development. They are very much intertwined. Development and climate change adaptation are very much one of the same. As you had highlighted, Mr. Co-Chair, we had a cyclone here only a few months ago. The reality is that we lost most lives ever. 44 people lost their lives, which is a lot of people for us. We had vast tracts of Fiji completely wiped out. Of course, our development partners, Australia, New Zealand, various other countries came to our assistance. But it has set back our economy quite substantially. Now, the reality though is because we are on a very good footing at that point in time, our growth rates will still be very positive. But what it does indicate is the vulnerability of Pacific Island countries. And indeed, I'm sure there are many other countries outside the Pacific region where you can have one single climatic event that can wipe out your economic growth. One single climatic event that can set you back a few decades. And that's the level of vulnerability, I think, that needs to be taken into account. To have measurements such as GNI to determine your accessibility to funding is perhaps a very narrow focus. So I hope that this meeting also is able to discuss other, what may be called ancillary determinants of vulnerability of a country, of accessibility of funds, will be discussed quite thoroughly and fully. Because we have, of course, on the back of that, our commitment to the SDGs. And as you know, that for many Pacific Island countries, that's a very onerous, they're very onerous goals. Some of us are starting off with a very sort of, on the back foot, we should say. So we need to take a holistic approach when we talk about funding, when we talk about accessibility to funding, to be able to understand, for example, the capacity or lack of, and the vulnerability of our economies. So without saying any further, I think we have a momentum at the moment in the Pacific. There's an increased awareness regarding the need to be able to access these funds. There's an increased awareness to be able to know how we should know how to access these funds. And of course, there's an increased awareness amongst the development partners that there is obviously some ground that we need to cover to be able to have a equal platform, if you like, so that all the countries, irrespective of their size, are able to access these funds. So I'd like to, of course, thank the Australian DFAT, Australian Aid, the Green Climate Fund, of course, for organising this meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge the various resource people who will be providing the resource in the next couple of days. I'd like to also take this opportunity to invite all of you who would like to attend the UNESCO meeting that's being held, a training session this Friday. It's a very hands-on approach. We want your officials to also know about it, and not just your necessarily permanent secretaries, but those below that, so they have an acute understanding and awareness, a deep sense of appreciation about what is happening. And I think one of the other issues that we do face in the Pacific is the depth of our human resources. A lot of our people do migrate, they tend to move around, so we tend to lose that capacity very quickly. So we need to build a very deep capacity sort of process within our officials and within the various ministries. And I'd like to also just take this opportunity to thank the ministers who were here a couple of weeks ago for their presence here. My good friend, the Minister from Samoa, was represented, but we hope to have some discussions after this on the margins. But thank you once again. I'd like to thank, of course, the Forum Secretariat for organising this meeting, and we look forward to some fruitful discussion. Vinaka. Thank you.